Our scripture today is Mark 5:1-20. Jesus and his disciples came to the other side of the lake, to the region of the Gerasenes. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out of the tombs. This man lived among the tombs, and no one was ever strong enough to restrain him, even with a chain. He had been secured many times with leg irons and chains, but he broke the chains and smashed the leg irons. No one was tough enough to control him. Night and day in the tombs and the hills, he would howl and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from far away, he ran and knelt before him, shouting, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." He said this because Jesus had already commanded him, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He responded, "Legion is my name, because we are many." They pleaded with Jesus not to send them out of that region. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. "Send us into the pigs," they begged. "Let us go into the pigs." Jesus gave them permission, so the unclean spirits left the man and went into the pigs. Then the herd of about 2,000 pigs rushed down the cliff into the lake and drowned. Those who tended the pigs ran away and told the story in the city and the countryside. People came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who used to be demon-possessed. They saw the very man who had been filled with many demons sitting there fully dressed and completely sane, and they were filled with awe. Those who had actually seen what had happened to the demon-possessed man told others about the pigs. Then they pleaded with Jesus to leave their region. While he was climbing into the boat, the one who had been demon-possessed pleaded with Jesus to let him come along as one of his disciples. But Jesus wouldn't allow it. "Go home to your own people," Jesus said, "and tell them what the Lord has done for you and how he has shown you mercy." The man went away and began to proclaim in the 10 cities all that Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
Okay, I want to begin this meditation on this interesting story with a little bit of a prologue. The theologian Walter Wink, back in the 80s, wrote a book called Naming the Powers, where he looks at power and the evils of institutional power from a spiritual point of view. He analyzes power through the lens of both the teachings of the Gospels and the writings of Paul. Every power, he says, tends to have a visible pole, be it a church, a nation, an economy, and an invisible pole, an inner spirit or driving force that animates, legitimates, and regulates its physical manifestation in the world. Neither pole is the cause of the other, but come into existence together and cease to exist together. Do you guys understand that? Okay, we're gonna work on that one. Wink's thesis is that the outer dimensions of powers and principalities cannot dominate our understanding, or we will inevitably misunderstand them. Science can study our outer dimensions of power, but religion can examine the inner and spiritual dimensions and gain profitable insights. So in other words, he's saying that there is a spiritual element in our world that we don't always recognize when we're analyzing systems of power. I bring up Wink's book because he took seriously the idea of influential spiritual worldly forces at play in the physical world. The text we read from Mark's Gospel, the story of the man possessed of many demons, raises an interesting and I think very critical question. It is a question we too often are afraid to raise in the more progressive churches. Are there malevolent spirits at work in the world? Is there a kind of dark spiritual force influencing the human-induced cruelties and sufferings we see manifesting in our world today? Is there some kind of, let's just call it, malevolent presence behind genocides, the wars, the tortures, the drive to dominate, the drive to possess and control, the hatreds born of ignorance and fear? In short, every human act that inflicts suffering. Is this a metaphysical matter that is something that goes beyond the mere material, physical world? Is there something like that at play? In our story this morning, we hear of a man possessed of evil spirits, legions, in fact. A legion was, in the Roman military terms, a division of Roman soldiers numbering in the thousands, upwards to around 5,000, I've read. Now, it's not my objective this morning to argue for or against the existence of what we may commonly think of as demons. I stress the word come to commonly think of because what I'm suggesting there is that stereotype we have of hideous monster-like spirits that inhabit the world and do the bidding of a supreme malevolent entity known as the devil to possess and oppress human souls, separating them from God in this world, if not for all eternity. I remain curious and somewhat agnostic as to trying to understand that phenomenon that's spoken of in the Gospels. Some people have pared it down to mental illness, and that may be, but I wonder, is there something more there? In light of the current geopolitical chaos and stresses we are all experiencing, I think we have to wonder, what is behind this? What is it about humans and their institutions particularly that defies rationality, that we can't figure out? Why do we seem to thwart and slander the good and lift up what is criminal and unjust and oppressive? What has taken hold, and I'm speaking collectively, the spirit, the zeitgeist of the times right now, what has taken hold of so many, some who self-identify as Christians? In Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he suggests that we are indeed dealing with powers beyond the powers. He says, for our struggles are not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the spiritual realms. Now, I don't agree with every point that the apostle makes in his letter to the Ephesians, where he speaks sometimes of, he's all over the map in that letter, by the way, wives being subject to their husbands, for instance. You know, I'll take that, put that aside. This one thing he says here about power and principalities, though, gives me pause. Not to get spooky about it, but we humans do seem to be prone to some kind of influences beyond the mere psychological, beyond our rational understanding. And these influences, as the story indicates, are legion. These influences go by 1,000 different names. I want to suggest, I'm going to pare it down to what I have boiled down to 4 of the most powerful demons that we deal with. And I use the word demon somewhat metaphorically, but not just metaphorically. Again, like I say, I don't know what to make in terms of that word. But spirits, if you will. The first spirit or demon I'll call ignorance. Now, ignorance takes two forms as I thought about it. Ignorance is literally not knowing. We may be ignorant because we just didn't know. Nobody told us otherwise. Therefore, we're kind of not responsible. In some cases, that is something, there's no way of knowing. It's hard to hold us to account. But in some cases, we are simply ignorant because we didn't bother to even try and know. We weren't curious. We didn't educate ourselves. And then there's another kind of ignorance, and that is the kind that we encounter quite a bit, I think, in our times, where we think we know, but we really don't. We fall for, as one of the president's advisors once said, alternate facts. In other words, lies. Narratives that may seem true but are not true because the narratives are lies. Like, for instance, most immigrants are violent criminals, just as an example. That's an ignorant statement because it does not line up with verifiable facts that anyone should be able to look up. Ignorance often disguises itself as fact, and in this social media world, now moving into an AI world, that's deeply concerning. Benevolent spirit of ignorance. It's interesting that Jesus' last pronouncement of forgiveness in the form of a prayer is spoken from the cross. Father, forgive them because they know not what they do. In other words, in their ignorance, in our ignorance, we crucified Jesus. And in the same fashion, this crucifixion continues as we participate in systems that harm our brothers and sisters. One of the Proverbs I like says, with knowledge comes great suffering. In our ignorance, we can avoid this suffering. For a while, we can stay comfortable. But in such comfort, we miss out on being faithful. And it always comes back to bite us. The second demon I would call out this morning is the demon of greed. The insatiable drive to possess, have, control, and consume. This is a demon that when not properly reined in, gives rise to lawless, unregulated, and toxic economic systems where things are loved and people are used. Greed is the demon that not only drives us to treat others like objects, it's also the demon that drives us to consume our earthly home, the very planet we depend on. While rationally we know that we can live in harmony with God's beautiful planet, it's all there, we're equipped, we've been gifted with this, there is an inscrutable force that somehow causes us to do otherwise. And we know that Earth's destruction is our destruction. Paul spoke well about this irrational impulse of sinful behavior where we do things that we don't understand why we do them. In Romans 7, he says, "For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil that I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it's no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it." Okay, that's a mind twister. I spent a semester in one of my classes at seminary trying to figure that passage out. And I don't think I did. But what Paul seems to be describing is an insidious trap of addictive behavior, really is what he's describing. And greed and the institutions that bow to the insatiable spirits of materialism is a kind of addiction. That's demon number 2. Demon number 3 I would call our attention to is indifference. Even more so than ignorance, this demon plays off our desire to be comfortable. People don't want to be bothered with caring because if we care, we might have to act, And that might require us to sacrifice some of our time and our resources. It might require us to stand out and feel awkward. It might even get us killed. So just keep your head down, even though what cries out for our attention is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes. Indifference has given up on hope and change. Indifference says, why try? The poor will always be with us. Why try? There will always be wars and famine. Why try? I'm just one person. I can't affect change for the good, so why try? The problems are just too big. I think I'll just keep on binging on Netflix. Guilty as charged. But at least I'm aware, and I do care, and I know y'all do too. It's a heavy burden sometimes caring, but it's so important. If we stop caring, we stop following Jesus. And finally, I want to call attention to the demon that I think holds a lot of influence in our world today, and I'll call it the archdemon of fear, because this demon seems to weave itself in and out of all the other demons mentioned so far. When angels appear in the Bible, of course, the first thing they say is, "Fear not." Why? Because fear is just the basis of our primal human nature. It's just wired into us. And for good reasons, but it leads us so astray. Just before the story of the demons and the pigs in the story we heard this morning, Jesus is in the boat on a stormy sea. And what happens when the storm threatens the disciples in their boat? Jesus says to the wind, "Be still." And he asks, "Why were you afraid?" Again, fear is just second nature to us. The first letter of John says, "God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. In this world, we are to be like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love." So there's a deep connection between fear and love, or anti-connection, I guess you might say. It's worth noting this phrase, "drives out fear." That driving or casting out is exactly what Jesus did with the spirit that possessed the man in the story. Jesus drives the demons into the pigs. Granted, it wasn't very loving to the pigs. But the larger point is, love drives out fear. God is literally experienced and known when people encounter this force. Again, we've all felt it. We all know it. This force we call love. We know what that feels like. We've received it, and we return it. Love drives out fear. And this love, which is the very essence of love of God, is the power that not only drives out fear, it drives out greed, it drives out indifference, it drives out ignorance, and any legion of demons you can think of. They can't be in its presence. The supernatural power found in love casts out the demons that plague our planet. Only love can do that. Violent force cannot do that. Coercion cannot do that. Not even laws and rules, though important, cannot do that. Only love can drive out fear. And fear, my friends, is at the heart of every malady of spirit. Now, did you know that you are, I hope you know, that you are casting out demons all the time? In small but very significant ways. When you care, when you pray, when you listen, when you pay attention, when you lovingly confront, you are casting out demons. When we listen to someone who is hard to listen to, we are casting out a demon. I'm thinking like braver angels, for example. When we speak truth to power by going to the governor's office or writing letters or marching for justice, we are casting out demons. When we mitigate our consumption because we want to live lightly on the earth, we're casting out demons. When we look someone in the eyes and remind them that they are beloved and we mean it, and they know we mean it, we are casting out demons. But just as importantly, we are, in another way of expressing it in a more positive way, we are incarnating God into the world. We are God's messengers. Whenever we create something that is beautiful and functional, I'm thinking of quilts get sent out. We are incarnating God into the world. I think you get my point. Whatever you do for love is an act of translating God into the world and maybe inoculating the world from some of the demons that we see in our culture today. Because wherever God is, fear is not, greed is not, indifference is not, ignorance is not. I realize I didn't really touch directly on this particular story of demon-possessed man. We could have talked more about the poor pigs or why the townspeople were so freaked out by the whole thing. But for me, the power of this story is to get us to think about the power of Jesus, God's embodiment of love, as more powerful than even the apparent power of the legions of oppression and dysfunction and evil we see going on in our world today. So be of encouragement. Despite what we may be feeling, and we may be feeling a bit down right now, I know I am sometimes, about the state of the world, God's love is the power that you and I carry with us every day. Let us never forget what a powerful and all-loving God we have the privilege of bringing into the world. Remember the words of John who said, "And the darkness shall not overcome the light." And that's a promise. We carry that out of here this morning. As a prologue, I guess that's the end of the sermon, but it kind of a prologue. That's not a good ending. I guess I'm done. Some sermons are like that. There's a prologue to this, though, that Walter Wink, again, he quoted Nietzsche a couple of times in his work, and he said, these are good things to remember. He said, "Whoever fights monsters," and this is Nietzsche speaking, "whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process one does not become a monster." I think that's a real challenge. Also said, when you look long into an abyss, the abyss looks into you. So to me, that's a reminder to always keep our eyes on the beauty, on truth, on the presence of God, seeing things through the lens of Christ, knowing that there are forces out there we cannot understand, but the force we can depend on and rely upon is the power of love, and that is the power of God.